Post-war American video lecture. As always, you want to make sure that you have something out so you can take some notes. If you wanted the printout, you go back to the website and get those. But make sure that you're taking some notes. We are doing a quick flyby. This is our 30,000 foot view, making sure that we get some general information for you and set you up so that you can ask further questions tomorrow in class. So first things first, you want to know about post-war America. Again, we're talking about post-World War II. It's a great time of prosperity. We have the majority of our workforce back in jobs, and so unemployment is very, very low. The Depression is over. First things you want to know, we're just going to kind of hit some of the major topics in the American home front. McCarthyism. Okay, we talked about this at the start of the Cold War. You have the senator from Wisconsin, Joseph McCarthy, who plays on the fear and fanaticism of communism infiltrating democracy here in America. And he claimed that he had a list of over 200 members of the American government who were in fact Russian spies, and secretly they were communists. McCarthy is forced to bring his accusations before the Senate, and in doing so, it sort of crumbles around him. And he looks really foolish towards the end of this era. He just ends up becoming embarrassed, and it doesn't end well for him. And if you want to know more about that, you can look that up on your own. But he's not the only one who is suspicious of communists secretly working inside the government. So you have groups like the House Committee of Un-American Activities, who are looking into Hollywood actors, actresses, directors. What are their ties to communism? Okay, so it's a time of great fear and uncertainty. You also have the baby boom, the post-war baby boom. In the years directly following World War II, many families experienced a boom in the number of children that they had in comparison to the previous generation. Okay, and if you think about that, it makes sense. Everybody is in the Great Depression. Nobody's working. It's not a time that you really want to bring children into the mix. But fast forward a few years, the Great Depression is over. We've won World War II, and now we have some more free time. And in comparison, on average in the 1930s, most households had 1.3 children. And in the 1950s, just 20 years later, you have the average being closer to 2.8 children per household. So almost 3 children per family. You have the explosion of the suburbs. You definitely want to know about this. This is a key idea, and it centers around the accessibility of the American dream. Okay, the American dream, basically that idea that you have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Poverty is gone. The Depression is over. And now you have a chance. You can own your own home. You can have little Scruffy, your dog, a yard, and the 2.5 kids that go along with it. The only thing is you have to leave the urban center and you have to move to these master planned communities in the suburbs. And so you start to see major urban centers, Chicago, New York, Boston, Los Angeles, start to build up little cities just outside that become these suburban areas. Now, the suburban areas, we're going to talk about them here in just a second, but they are, for the most part, mass-produced consumption centers, meaning we're going to need grocery stores, we're going to need strip malls, we're going to need fast food restaurants, because life is all about convenience now. My American dream is to have as much as I want, whenever I want. And for the first time, we really start to live in a material world. And some of this prosperity and excess income is tied to the growth of our economy post-World War II. Which brings us to Phoenix. We'll talk a little bit about the place that we live in. Okay, Phoenix had been a decently sized town prior to World War II, but nothing like it became right directly after post-World War II. Okay, and you have a major urban boom in Phoenix, partly because of cheap housing, partly because of the accessibility to automobiles. I mean, obviously, you've been around Phoenix. You know that we're pretty spread out, and it was that way in the beginning. You can see over here on this map that the year corresponds to the density of the population. Okay, so the blue puts us right at about 2,000. If you go in and you go back to 1950, the gray, I mean, you can see Phoenix is a relatively small town in 1950. But over the next 20 years, over the 60s and 70s, we sprawl out and we build and build and build, and it becomes a very suburban growth. Okay, you have places like Peoria, Glendale, Cave Creek, Mesa, Gilbert, Chandler. These are suburbs of Phoenix, and they expand and expand and expand. Okay, Phoenix goes from being a small, western town to really becoming one of the major urban centers in the United States. And today, I want to say we fluctuate between the 6th and 8th most populated city in the U.S. Okay, a couple social rights issues that we want to know about. Women's rights. All right, these are going to center around the workplace. After the war, women did not want to or did not easily give up their working positions. The demand for equal opportunity and equal pay really began here. Women didn't want to go back to the house. They didn't want to go back to the gender norms that we had, or the gender roles that we had prior to World War II, where women primarily took care of the home and men primarily provided. It started to really shift to be more of an equal playing field. Now, this brought many, many, many benefits, but one of the major consequences is the deconstruction of the nuclear family. Okay, nuclear family, basically mom, dad, children, siblings. Well, that goes away because as you start to have mom and dad both working, you start to have a changing of the guard, if you will, over who gets to run the household. And it just really shifted the culture. Okay, but this is a great time for women to begin their movement towards equal rights in the workplace. Okay, you also have the pop culture revolution. You want to know a little bit about this? Music is huge during this pop culture revolution. You have the advent of rock and roll. Okay, and a great way to think about this is in the 1920s, we had a musical revolution with the Harlem Renaissance and sort of the spreading out of blues. In the 50s, you have rock and roll. In the 80s, okay, you have big hair bands and grunge rock and things like that. You could even argue that we're currently in a musical revolution, a pop musical revolution. All right, but you want to know that the themes during the rock and roll era were very independent focused, very down with the authority focused. Okay. We also have the invention of the television, or the not the invention of it, but the widespread access to the television, which allowed for Ed Sullivan shows, variety shows, things like that, the nightly news, and commercials. Okay, we start to see that in American culture, we're going to sell constantly. And the average American is bombarded with over 1,000 advertisements per day. You have racial tensions coming to a very high boiling point. All right, there was a coming together during the war, during World War II, but it didn't answer any of the racial tensions. It kind of just brushed them to the side. All right, we had segregated regiments within the military, but when we get home and when the war ends, we kind of go back to how things were. Okay, the restrictions and racial issues don't change at all, but they become actually more restrictive. The minority population within the United States had begun to have enough, and race relations becomes a major, major issue. Okay, during the growth of the suburbs, wealthier white Americans, for the most part, leave urban centers, and we essentially have a division within cities of suburban and urban that also goes in line with race. In 1956, families living in suburban areas on average earned more than 70% higher wages than those living in urban areas. So think about that for a second. If we have white suburban areas, for the most part, where wealth is going to accumulate at a higher rate, and then you have minority urban centers where they are earning 70% less, clearly we're going to have some major issues. Okay, and that's, you start to see this happen, and we'll talk more about this in the civil rights lecture, but just to kind of get you aware of that. All right, and then the last thing that we're going to talk about here is that there are some major Supreme Court decisions that take place during this era that we need to be aware of. All right, and the first one is Brown versus the Board of Education, and we're going to do an activity with this tomorrow, so we're not going to go too in depth, but you definitely want to understand that this outlawed segregation in schools. It became illegal, it was unconstitutional to segregate or divide schools based on race. Okay, Miranda versus Arizona. All right, what we want to know about that is that if you are a suspect, if you are arrested, you must be given your rights or stated your rights. Otherwise, any evidence found would be inadmissible in court. And then the last one that's kind of a really big deal that we want to hit on is Roe v. Wade. Okay, and this is sort of the granddaddy issue of them all. And this effectively legalized abortion. Okay, it limited at the time abortion up to the third trimester. Okay, later that wording was amended to say viability of life, meaning that a fetus was able to be aborted legally up until the time that fetus was able to live outside of the womb, independent of the mother. So today, most hospitals are able to sustain life at 23, 24 weeks. Okay, so think about that. Basically halfway through a pregnancy. All right. This is a very, very hotly debated issue. It's one of the most divisive issues in our country today. And what you want to know about this is that it's a very contested decision. And so even though the court ruled that abortions were legal, they did it in the name of female health protection. And this is one of the reasons why it is so hotly debated, because people want to continually ask, well, what does that mean? It's a very vague statement. Okay, we'll talk more about that tomorrow as well. All right, as always, make sure that you log on to the website, answer the questions that go along with this video. Check your notes, highlight any questions that you have so that you're ready to hit the ground during our Q&A. And remember, there's major details that just for the sake of time we skipped over. So if you want to know more, please go ahead and research it on your own. And hopefully you can bring something to our discussion tomorrow that is new and different. And as always, thank you so much for investing in your learning. Adios.